Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is the Voices of Healing podcast. I'm your host, Tina Clark. I'm a shamanic Reiki healer. And today I have another wonderful healer as a guest. Her name is Roxanne Chaput, and she's up in Canada trying to stay warm right now. And we're going to talk a bit about self-actualized healing and what that means. But before we get into that, I would love Roxanne to share more about herself.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tina, for having me. It's as we, had a conversation before, it's just an honor to be in this co-creational space with you. So thank you for that. So my name is Roxanne, and the primary element of my sacred purpose and sacred mission is really to be a global luminary. And in the way that I conduct myself in, states of being, it's really about helping other leaders and global leaders really come into this place of self-actualized healing and how that impacts, the communities that they touch and the countries that they touch and the global impact that they create. So it's all about learning the mastery of our own self-healing and how we can actually heal ourselves in all multidimensional ways.
Yeah, so I know that you have created a healing modality called cellular healing, which is multi-dimensional. So let's bring it down to earth a little bit for the
Yeah.
listeners and explain what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. So cellular healing and multidimensional healing, when we reference multidimensional healing, is that every one human has multidimensional complexities to them. So we are not just, the physical, we're not just the emotional, we're not just the intellectual or the mental, we're actually the astral and the energetic and the soulful. And those aspects of when we're going and we're moving through a healing aspect or going through a self-mastery aspect is a lot of the times when we are dealing in Western medicine with one aspect of the humanness of who we are, it doesn't actually affect true healing. It's not until we uncover the layers and we go through the complete multidimensional healing that we actually fully heal from emotional situations, mental situations, intellectual situations, physical situations, right? And we're seeing that so much more pronounced in Western medicine, that the part of the Eastern medicine of what, has been traditionally experienced and has been, the tradition of medicine, there's a beautiful culmination on how we can weave both of these elements into our knowledge base, into how we actually derive through our centers of intelligence and how we actually affect healing within oneself.
So say you have a person coming to you that's a leader in their community, because I think that's what you specialize in.
Yeah.
And how do you guide and help them with cellular healing?
Absolutely. So every single human has a different blueprint and is absolutely divinely unique for their own sacred geometry and just who they are as a person and what they chose to contract into this lifetime. So where they hold is not going to be the same as the next person, right? So if I'm a very emotional and I'm a very empathetic person, I'm going to hold a lot into the emotional body. But if I'm very analytical and I'm very into the logical aspects of who I am, I'm going to hold very much in the mental body. Even though the body, it integrates all into the cellular components of the body, the cellular disposition is about affecting everything from the outer astral field all the way into the inner being, right? So when we are going into practice and when we're going into leadership and self-actualized leadership within their own self, within their own self-mastery, it's where are they at right now and where are the major imprints that are lying before we can even get to the next layer, right? So if I'm holding a lot in my mental body, I'm not going to be able to come into peace and come into that succinctment into my emotional body until I actually come at ease and I'm able to self-actualize the mental body before going into the emotional complexity. So it all depends on who and where they're storing things and how we're able to work through that. And that the way that we do that is through, a ton of different practices of what is actually their highest self and what that is actually being guided and stewarded for them to actually actualize so that they can also learn the internal medicine of the experience of what they're holding within them so that it's not bad, it's not shameful, it's not the shadow aspect, it's actually very beautiful and it's actually very empowering. And it's actually the alchemy of what creates us to be who we innately are. So the discovery and the deconstruction is different for every single human being.
So I feel like what we're trying to achieve this balance among all these different bodies, being the mental, the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual. But I can't not think about how collectively we're influenced by our communities and by our country. And I would say the US, which is the country I reside in, is very mental.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is not our ownership, is to hold the collective energy of the sacred purpose and of what we've come here to do. If we're in a place of where we're leading shamanism, or we're leading light working abilities and things of that nature, where we're serving communities and where we want to see an uplift in humanity. When we look at these aspects, it's not for us to own where somebody else is or how the narrative is being pushed by the elements that are actually trying to keep them into that mental looping, into the mental body, so that they can never be into the empowerment of the full multidimensional self. And when we're removed from that harmonification of all of the bodies coming into synergy and alignment, that is our most powerful state of being, because we are living in emotional regulation, we're living in inner peace and fulfillment, and we're creating our creational abilities. We're all creators, creatrixes. And when we understand how we use that creatrix ability, we don't affect change through words. We affect change through being, right? It's a state of being. When I look at somebody and I am inspired by them, I'm not inspired solely by their words. I'm inspired by the way they present themselves, the integrity of who they are, the way of being of how they present themselves to affect change. So when we look at the elements of a country that is created to create segregation, create division, create divisiveness within a community, because as a collective, as we come together, we are the most powerful state of being that nothing can detract from that. And we see pockets of windows of that when people come together as community and they fight for rights and they fight for freedom and they fight for sovereignty. And it's really important that we don't allow the ideology and the illusionary base that these systems actually are able to actually physically control us. That is a lie. That is an illusion. That is an ideology that they want us to feel and think, so that it minimizes our power and our abilities.
Right. And when we're divided, we're more easily manipulated and controlled.
Absolutely, because they're working on a fear receptor, or they're working on the fear projection, fear, tariff this, tariff that, divisive here, race against this, ethnicity against this, sexuality against this. Like, it's all about division. It's never about coming together as community and loving one another and supporting one another. It's how do we create hatred? How do we create divisiveness? And as a soul being, it's important that we come back to that. Actually, we love absolutely everybody and we see the potentiality in everybody. But all of these false ideologies start creating and warping ideologies and mindsets and belief systems that are absolutely untrue and falsified.
Right. And I always like to say that the only truth is love and that we come from love. So anything else is really a lie.
And you
And
cannot, yeah, and you can't allow, and you can't force somebody to be in a state of paralysis without creating fear throughout the entirety of their body, right? If I create fear throughout somebody's body of survival, of being threatened, of their life, or anything of these natures, of just being innately who they are, part of our soul identity, right? Like, we have soul desires, and part of those soul desires are identity. And when we can't be in the full expression of who we are, it's an internal entrapment, it's an internal imprisonment, right? So when we're being in a state of that imprisonment, we're not actually being in a state of empowerment, we're in a state of disempowerment. So how do we create that? Well, we create fear in order to keep people in a state of paralysis where they can't shift forward and they can't shift backward, because that is, chronologically impossible. So what do we look like? Even though we're working in different timelines as multidimensional beings, we physically can't go back into the past in this now moment, right? In the linear of the earth. So when we look at these aspects, it's really important that actually at the deep rooted element of what fear is, because fear is a secondary emotion, the primary emotion is actually deep sadness. When we create divisiveness, we create segregation, we create fear of survival, or if our loved ones not being able to provide, it's a deep sadness that our survival is at stake.
so knowing that and knowing what's happening, I can just speak for the US. You can speak for Canada, maybe,
Yeah.
or globally, like, how do we overcome this? Because there's a lot of pressure. I know there are ways where we can. The divisiveness is pushed upon us, like through mainstream media, which I know I highly recommend disconnecting from that, because that energy is just negative, 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 and it's not a balanced perspective of how people really are and what's really
Absolutely.
happening.
Absolutely. It's projection and perception and perceptive, right? That is what they're aiming for. It's projection, perceptive, and perception. So if I can allow for someone to perceive a certain element, then they can actually factually, logistically, and analytically make that true. Right. So if I give enough facts for something to be true, then it will be the truth, even though it's not the inner truth and it's not the deep knowingness. And the only way that we disempower these things is by disconnecting to them. And it doesn't mean that we have to be naive. It doesn't mean that we don't have to understand or understand what's happening in the world. But it's also to remember that the light always prevails. And we came here on the earth to experience duality because Earth is a planet of duality. And in order to be in duality, it is for us to be able to be on a pathway to understand different aspects of our multidimensional being. And without that duality, we can't learn that. We can't have the mastery of that within that polarity, because that is what the earth was created for. It wasn't initially created for. It became a place of duality because of, many things that I will not go into in this moment. But that's a probably different show. So when we look at these aspects of the polarity and the duality, is that the light always wins, and that the light is within us, right? The God, creator, consciousness, universe, all of these elements are within us. So when we look into that aspect and we ask ourselves, what is the energy exchange if I tap into the news? What is the energy exchange if I tap into social media? Because all of these algorithms are created to create poison, right? It's like little streams of poison, 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 poison. One happy story here and there, but trauma, 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 wounding, 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 bad, bad, bad. It's not about the beauty of life, when in reality, life is absolutely beautiful because it's perfect as it is. So when we look into that element and we curate around that and we allow that energy exchange to keep happening, and we allow ourselves to come into a place again of disempowerment, because now we're taking our energy source that could be derived in doing something very beautiful for us, self-care or caring for somebody else or anything of these natures. We deplete our energy consistently and we give it to these matrices and we give it to these systems, and we put in ourselves in a place of disempowerment. We can know something, we can know what's happening in the world, but then we also have to come back to our deep knowingness of what and who we truly are. And the reality is that we are soul beings, and every religious scripture and every element that has ever been, spoken about is that we are soul, we are energy, and energy cannot be created, nor can it be destroyed. So that means that the wisdom in which we are not actually exuding that anywhere on the earth plane when we're coming into our sageness. And we're in our sageness, it's important that we're coming into that harmonification piece, because it's being that is the state of change. It's very easy to want to have curiosity or to crave a behavioral process that we've been indoctrinated into, and keep feeding that and feeding that and feeding that, knowing that it really all it's doing is intoxicating us and actually not putting us into a place and state of healthy being.
Right. And all these activities, just be mindful of how you're using, these technologies or social media. Are you using it as an escape? Or could your time be better used doing something else?
I think it's really, important when we're looking at escapism, is that when we are escaping from our reality, it means that our reality is too painful to be in. And then the question is, why? Why are we feeling the need to escape? What are we not allowing ourselves to feel? What are we not allowing ourselves to process? What are we not allowing ourselves to move through? That is personally just why I've disconnected from all social media aspects, because I'm not into an algorithm that devalues another human being or projects hate. I am not about that. And yes, there's a lot of beautiful things, and I don't want to discredit that. It is a tool, but the tool is not being utilized to affect for the light. It is a
Hmm.
tool utilized to de-energize somebody. And to, if you go onto social media, let's give that an example, and you're scrolling for 5 minutes, check your energy levels before you go into that, see how you're feeling internally. And then after been 5-10 minutes onto that algorithm of how you actually feel in terms of that energy exchange, is the cost worth it, right? Is that continual cost worth for you to immerse yourself into that and put the energy into that and then come away, take away feeling depleted?
Yeah, definitely for sure. We need to be more aware of our energy and how our energies are affected by some of these things and these technologies for sure.
Yeah, and all we have accountability for is ourselves, right? I can't control my neighbor. I can't control my mother, my father, my siblings. I can, say what I feel. I can have freedom of speech, and I can, in the way that I be, that they can, take whatever they need from that. But my intention is not to change anybody. My intention is for people to see that there's a different narrative, that there's a different outcome to life, and there's a different way that we can live that is very peaceful and very loving and very happy, very joyful and very curious in a very beautiful way. And we lost that innocence, from children to adults. We tend to start to lose that innocence because we're indoctrinated to lose the innocence, to not be in our full state of being of who we actually are in all multidimensional ways, because this isn't accepted. That's not accepted. You don't talk about this. You don't talk about that. But in reality, that is the beauty of who we are as humans and what we came here to experience. And we're detracting the experience by not actually fully immersing into it. And when we're immersing into it in all of our state of being, it's not for me to dictate how somebody else is going to live their life, but all I can do by the way that I choose to live in integrity of my own self and my own soul purpose and what I vowed to myself is that I can only show by the state of being. And if they choose to walk with me, then they choose to walk with me. And if they choose to not walk with me, then that's their choice. That's the power of free will. And when we look at when somebody affects change, and this is why I love working with global community leaders, is that when you affect change within one person, they affect change within themselves. It impacts at least the minimum of about 100 people that are on the external of them, right? So family, connections, networks, all of these elements because of how they choose to show up in presence.
Definitely. We don't even realize how far reaching these changes can be. And, whether it ripples backward toward in our families or forward for our descendants or
None
just,
of our business. None
mhm,
of our business, right? Like it's like when we have this thing that we need instant gratification and we need to see the change and we need to see these elements as humans because our ego wants to have a surety that what we are doing and how we are living in a state of being needs to have a reward system. But in the actuality, all the greatest leaders have just created small ripple, small ripple, small ripple. And usually, the majority of it is after they've passed, they've recognized and they've come to this place of realization that this person was serving out of a complete place of beauty and being. And how do we capture that? How do we understand that further? And how do we understand that further? That is the beauty of that. We don't need to know how it's impacting. All we need to do is continue moving forward and listening to our soul's guidance, listening to our soul's whispers, on always choosing our highest alignment. Everything in our life is incremental and every choice is incremental. Everything has an outcome. So we can choose to live in our highest alignment. So if I'm giving away my energy for something that isn't fulfilling me and actually isn't re-energizing me, is it actually a reciprocal exchange? Is it an exchange that is actually nourishing me, or is it detracting value from me?
that's a good way to put it. And we have to be very aware and ask ourselves these questions constantly. Because I feel like a lot of people are kind of on autopilot and not really questioning, all of these things that are happening or all of these, platforms that are available to us, right? Like I know that, I've had problems with Facebook and I've wanted to quit Facebook so many times, but I stay there because I know that I'm reaching people that I otherwise won't be. And so what I've done to cope with that is to really manage my feed
Yeah.
very diligently and make sure that, I'm not seeing a lot of complaining, a lot of politics, a lot of this and that. And I use it for the greater good, hopefully.
Absolutely. And, just this is just my own personal, choice. This is not a choice that anybody else needs to make. But for me, even in that space, and yes, like that is the belief that we are reaching and we receive affirmation, a message here and there saying, wow, like, you're the way that you're creating, the way that you're speaking, the way that you write your words, or the way that you create a video, it really has touched me in a profound way. And that is absolutely beautiful. And there's nothing wrong with that. For me, it's just I want something that doesn't control who gets to see it and who doesn't get to see it, that it's something that is available to anybody and anybody should they even just put something into the Google search, right? And even then, at some point, like what they're already kind of discussing is that that will also be controlled algorithms at some point. So there's never going to be a perfect solution. I just don't want to be interjected and have little things come through that give my whole body just like, or it puts me in a state of paralysis of comparison, which a lot of times social media does, where it puts you in a state of freeze and carrying out your soul's mission, right? So you're like comparing yourself like, oh, well, I'm not delivering in this way, or I don't feel like I'm speaking to this, or I'm not speaking to that. And we're taking away from our own sacred medicine because we're trying to be like the next person who we're not supposed to be like, because we have a unique soul design and a unique blueprint to have come here to share the alchemy of the experiences that you chose to have.
Yeah, and I noticed within social media, there's a lot of copying and repetition of the exact same information among people.
Regurgitation. It's
Yeah, and
regurgitation.
it's like, who actually came up with this first? And how many copies of this is out there just because they want to get the clicks or this went viral?
Again, it's that instant gratification. So what energy exchange is it serving? Right? Are we creating just for a state of being? I don't care who sees it, I don't care who reads it. The point is spirit, channel, everything told me that I need to share this. I'm doing what my soul is asking me to do, point blank, period. Nothing else is the outcome that I need. I don't have to have an expectation. I don't need to have a reward. I don't need to have instant gratification. I need to just be in a state of allowance and surrender. And it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. When I speak to most business owners, again, coming back from the leadership aspect, is that a lot of the business doesn't even derive from Facebook. It's just an extra touch point in terms of connection, trust building, and trust rapport, and all of these elements, which is a very beautiful thing. But at the end of the day, when we come to the actual rootedness of that belief system, a lot of their pipeline or their sales pipeline or the people that they're serving actually doesn't even come through a Facebook filtration system. So when we get to the realism of that, it's not to discredit, that avenue. It's just to be able to say, is this actually what it is? And again, that's their intention. They need to grow a business, they have a product to sell, things of that nature, they have a service that they feel will really, benefit people. Am I speaking to the right audience? Am I speaking to the right communities? But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter any of those things. That is a strategy that was deployed in order to create masculinity and a hustle, hustle, hustle mentality to have instant gratification and results when businesses are not built and created that way. There's meant to be an ebb and flow, and who is meant to be in alignment with you will find their way. We're just in the process that we have to hurry everything up, and we're in a rush state of mentality.
Yeah, I agree. The algorithms are not working in our favor, especially for healers, people who are authentically serving communities. And I know that. I mean, I'm aware of that. Um, but let's go back to conscious leadership. How do you define
Absolutely.
that? What is a conscious leader?
A leader that is fully into their consciousness is someone that is self-aware, that has great accountability, and is leading from a place that is healed. And you know, healed people heal other people. And even in just state of being, even sometimes with, an exchange that is shared with wisdom, advice, guidance, whatever that might be, stewardship, all of these elements, even sometimes, right, we have a product that really speaks to us. Like if, you have something that's just so sacred to you and you feel the soul resonance of that piece for you, that is also speaking into the volume of that consciousness. So we're creating from a place of consciousness. We're not creating from a place of really, when we think about that, is like we're not serving from the mental body, we're serving from a place of human connection. And when we're a conscious leader, we're taking human connection, we're taking compassion, we're leading with compassion, we're leading with grace, we're leading with understanding and understanding, and we're leading with humanness, and we're leading with soulfulness, and we're not just leading for the sake of an element of like people are people, like they're just going to do what I need them to do. And this mentality, we're serving, actually, we actually care about the people that are helping us thrive and actually sending out the message along with us and that are creating that movement along with us. So when we talk about conscious leadership are we self-aware? Are we self-accountable? Can I say, a lot of leaders, when we look at, the prehistorics of leadership, is that they're very much in the ego. They can never be wrong. They can never rely on their team strengths and their abilities and their magic. It's all about them and all about what they can deliver and their deliverables and all of these natures. But at the end of the day, when we look at a conscious leader, is how do I utilize the team to bring out their magic, to bring out their leadership abilities, and how do I help elevate them as well as they choose to in terms of their own self-development, professional development, and all of these elements? And how can I stand in a room and maybe, we're human, we're going to make some decisions that maybe didn't pan out and it didn't work out the way that we anticipated, but how can I take ownership and true ownership of that and accountability as the leader of that structure of that business? And there's a lot of elements that come into this. And when we can't sit in our ego and when we can't have, egoic deaths and egoic surrenderings, it's really challenging to be able to sit in a space to accept feedback, to give proper, compassionate, loving feedback that can actually help somebody grow and nurture them to grow instead of depleting them and making them feel disempowered by a decision that they maybe have made. There's all of these elements that come into conscious leadership. And how do we serve the community, right? How do we give back to a community? How do we give back on a global scale? How do we give back to the elements that are really important, that really bring humanity together? And that's when we're serving from a conscious place.
Well, I have to say that I haven't seen a lot of conscious leadership in the places I've worked for in the past. And so if I would have loved to work for a conscious leader.
Yeah.
But I do know that a lot of what you're talking about, I try to do within, my services and my business. So,
And that's your conscious leadership, right?
mhm.
And conscious leadership doesn't mean that we have to have this global organization. Conscious leadership is even our self-leadership of how we steward ourselves, how we steward our families, how we steward our family dynamic, right? As the matriarch of a family, regardless if you have children or not, as the matriarch or patriarch of a family, you have a sole responsibility to be a conscious leader within your own self-accountability, right? Being accountable and responsible for yourself. And the way that you show up in that way, and the way that you honor yourself and you come into your practice, and that you look at others with compassion and like humanitarianism and all of these elements, that is beauty, right? When we're leading in a place, it doesn't have to be philanthropy, it doesn't have to be these elements, but how are we serving? Even if we go to the grocery store, can we give someone a warm smile and give them that exchange that just brightens up their day? We never know what somebody is moving through or what transitional process they're navigating through. That is the state of being, right? That's the state of the energy. The energy speaks for itself when you walk into a room, when you walk in the grocery store, your energy is already exchanging information and communication pathways with the other energy fields around you. How can you present and be accountable for that state of being? And it doesn't mean we have to be okay 100% of the time. Absolutely not. We are human and we have emotional body and we have to express it because we move through activations and triggers and we move through elements of deep-rooted beliefs that really aren't congruent with us. So there's all of these elements, but how can we still come from a place of compassion and love toward one another without judgment or without biases?
I love that. I know that when I go out and about, I try to smile at everybody,
Yeah.
and it really changes the energy of everything. I've even had people look at me like they were shocked I was smiling at them.
Like, are you supposed to?
I'm like, yeah, I'm smiling at you. And I'm asking you, how are you doing? I hope you're having a good day. And if you're not, I hope it gets better.
And even when you walk in with clean energy of being responsible for your energy, like, you have a belief system or you have a wound or you have an experience that you move through and healing through that, the energy purity that comes into when you even come into that space without having a physical disposition with that somebody, it is already uplifting the collective.
Mhm.
Again, it's coming back to the state of being.
And how are you contributing to that? Are you adding to that? Are you adding compassion and positivity to that? Or are you sucking it dry? Or are you just adding to the negativity?
Yeah, and we don't have to be, under the spectrum of toxic positivity if we're really not in the emotional space to, some days I have a sad day. If I'm moving through a lot, if I'm going through a process of grief, I'm not going to be, happy, bubbly, but I'm still accountable for my energy field. I'm still accountable for how I enter a space, or I'll be more inward so that I'm not impacting or bleeding onto others or putting my energy out onto others and creating an exchange that is unwarranted and unneeded and unwanted, because that is a projection, right? I'm projecting at somebody instead of actually being responsible for myself.
Yeah, it's an understanding that your energy affects others around you. And, how are you going to contribute to that? Because I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of people are not aware of this and they're just reacting, reacting, reacting to everything.
And when
And
we're, yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, and when we're in that state of, reactivity, it means that we're out of the state of being. We're allowing something else to control our emotional regulation, and we're not in a state of inner peace. And we can't get to inner peace until we actually reconnect to our soul, and we reconnect to our emotions, and we reconnect to our intellectual body and our centers of intelligence and our physicality. A lot of soulful people, they're connected with their soul, but then they have so much discrimination or judgment towards their body or towards their emotional body and things of this nature. That's not coming back into that harmonification. And if we're not in harmony with ourselves, we can't be in inner peace, because a part of us is dysregulated. A part of us isn't in the congruency of the full place of harmonization within ourselves. So when we're coming into these elements of reactivity, what is triggering that reactivity? What am I not looking at? What am I not observing? Because the people around us are solely mirrors. They're mirror reflections of where we need to actually look even deeper within ourselves. And I know that's a really challenging thing. Well, they did this and they did that. But at the end of the day, why did we allow them to disempower us and to keep our power? As a child, something happens as a child. No human being, no soul being deserves to ever have their sovereignty stripped away from them. When we have those exchanges as a child, right? Because if we're thinking about accountability and we're thinking about emotional regulation, is that what they did, it does not make it right, right? And there's going to be a grieving process through that, but it's allowing ourselves to go through the grieving process and to be responsible for how we choose to show up after that. That is the only thing that we have the power and control over. We can't control having closure. We can't control that they should have did it or they shouldn't have did it. All of these elements we cannot control. The only thing that we can control is, are we going to continue to give them our power and give the keys to our power and say, here, you have all of my power, or I'm going to take my power back. I'm going to take my soul essences back, and I'm going to lead from a place of victory. I'm going to lead from a place of elevation, and I'm going to take my power back, and I'm going to empower myself.
I love that. So, one question I wanted to ask you is, why is healing the past so important?
Yeah, I think we can't not heal the past, because if we don't heal the past, we can't actually heal the present, right? So if we can't come into a place of acknowledgement, and when we speak about not just our own past, but if we speak about generational and intergenerational healing, is that, you know, when we're healing an aspect within ourselves, and it may not have been created by us, right? It might not have been an experience that we've even had in this lifetime. And it may not have been an experience that we even had in previous lifetimes, but it could have been a generational experience that has kind of been a deep-rooted way that has come into the root of our center of intelligence. And when we're healing the past and when we're taking accountability, because obviously if it's being brought to our awareness and it's being brought to our acknowledgement, it's because we're actually being contracted to heal that element so that we can heal the generations behind us and we can heal the generations before us and we can heal the current generations that are within us. So when we look at these aspects of looking at the past, if we bring it back more to our own lifetime of childhood, is that everything has a root. Everything, every belief system, every belief structure, every core value, every experience doesn't mean that you're not going to have experiences when you're older that would have happened in your preteens and teenage years and, adulthood and things of that nature. But a lot of the times when we look at healing, a lot of it has happened even, in the embryo stage, funny enough, embryo stage all the way up until about the age of about 12 years old. A lot has usually transgressed throughout that period, and it's not something that will be in the conscious mind. It will be in the subconscious, it'll be in the hyperconscious, but something has happened to have created a rooted system. And it doesn't mean that everything has. Again, we can have those experiences happen throughout the entirety of our life, and we still have it happen as we move through life. Life is duality, right? When we look at these elements, is that if we can't take the root of what we're trying to heal, and we're trying to heal where the imprint has been created within that root, no matter what has happened to us in our life, it would have had to come through our energy field. It would have had to come to an astral field. If it was a physical violation, if it was a verbal violation, if it was an emotional violation, all of these elements would have had to come through the energy field in order to actually physically hit the body, the emotional body, mental body, and all of these elements, and then get rooted somewhere within our centers of intelligence or within the cellular component of our disposition of our tissue in our body, right? What we do, somatic movement, we're releasing memories, we're releasing elements that are actually creating distortion within the body. So when we're healing and we're actually coming to the root of what is actually perpetuating whatever that activation or that trigger is showing and demonstrating where you need to heal, it's important that we're taking the root and we're honoring the root and we're bringing that back into the light and we're giving it love and we're thanking it for its experience, because it also gave us the gift of wisdom, and it also gave us the gift of alchemy of what actually makes us who we are today, right? So it's a very beautiful process. It's not about hating an element. It's not about coming to a place. Again, everything is love, right? Everything has been created from the creator to the consciousness is love, right? That is the true thing. That is, we are love. We are love. We are light. We are love. And it's hard to feel that when we're in the emotional body. But when we're healing that rootedness, when we're removing that rootedness, then we're actually able to affect change within our own body, self-actualized healing, right? We know by scientific measure and metric that we are actually able to heal the physical body. Well, we're not just only able to heal the physical body. Our pineal gland can heal a lot of elements, but we are capable of healing our emotional body, our mental body, our physical, our intellectual. We're able to heal our centers of intelligence. We're able to heal our astral body, and we're able to heal all of these dispositions within us. That's why it refers to as cellular healing. And when we're healing at the multidimensional complexity, it means that we're actually affecting healing. So, core story. Let's say an example that somebody has, heightened sense of emotional distress and maybe mental distress and has a lot of depression and has a lot of anxiety. If I'm only dealing with the mental body and I'm only dealing with the emotional body, when we reference maybe talk therapy or anything that is like cognitive behavioral therapy and things of that nature, we're actually only affecting healing in one element, but the root and the imprint is still sitting in the cellular and the energetic field, right? So that's why we don't actually get change. We come back and we circle back, and it's like a circle. It's a pattern of behavior, right? Because the body doesn't know, because we haven't given it the command, right? Because the mind is so powerful that we only have to give a command to continuously heal ourselves, right? It's about opening those activations and opening those elements. If I tell my body naturally through its own computing system, if I cut myself open, my body naturally already knows how to heal itself. But when we create all these imprints and all these blockages, we create blocks so that these receptors and the neuron pathways can't actually communicate the way that they're intended to. And if they can't communicate the way that they're intended to, we can't actually affect full multidimensional healing.
So, how do we go about finding the root of the
And
problem?
and that's deep self-exploration. So for every single body, it's going to be something different. For, let's say, for a lot of times, like if we go into theta state or for moving through all of these aspects, sometimes it's coming right into the astral body, sometimes it's being in the physical body, sometimes it's going through deep somatic movement. But at the end of the day, we have to keep asking ourselves, where did this come from? And when I sit with people and when I sit with leaders, it's like we don't just stop at like, oh, well, why do you think that is? It's a huge process of discovery. To just even find one root can take like a multitude of hours to find that one root, because there's so many questions that it's an excavation, right? We're deconstructing something, we're removing the layers like an onion, and we're getting to the root of what it is. And depending how deeply something is buried, we have to keep immersing ourselves into questions. And if someone can go into trance state and the soul body is presenting itself forward and we're having dialogue and conversation, it will navigate the pathway, and everything's recorded, right? So you can reflect and be like, holy shit, like, okay, like I remember that now, but I would have never remembered that. I was 2 years old. Like I never even remembered that memory. You know what I mean? Like it could be different for every single buddy, right? Or if it's generational, like, oh my gosh, yeah, like I remember my mom speaking of this or that. Or if we go back into the soul memory, right? Because we have soul memory, we don't just have a 2-strand DNA molecule, we have a third strand, and that third strand is the cellular memory. And that cellular memory has contacts in terms of every life that you've lived before that. Not that you're going to remember that in the human mind, and you're not meant to, but it has all of the prehistorics that have happened in previous lifetimes and all of the historics that have happened into all of the generational patterns that have happened before you and what are going to happen before you. Because again, we are multidimensional and we are living a number of timelines at the same time.
Yeah, I love that. And asking the question, where did this come from? Or what is the root of this problem? I think it's very important to ask the right question.
Well, the soul speaks very loudly, and the mind also speaks very loudly when it goes a little bit more to a state of homeostasis, right? Where it's just like, okay, like I'm in a place of deep relaxation. And then when I start asking the questions, it's almost like an interview process for the soul, right? Okay, why are we doing this like this? Oh, okay, this is that. Okay, well, then why do we choose to do that? And then it's like a huge excavation of what happens. And a lot of times when people come out, they're like, holy shit, like what was that? And I'm like, that's your soul. That's your soul speaking, because it's giving you the pathways. It's restoring the information so that you can actually get to the rooted element of where that is. And sometimes the root will come very naturally to the consciousness, and there's not a lot of excavation that needs to happen, right? It's something that's a little bit fresher. It's something that has been a top of surface, right? When we think of something that, if we have low self-esteem and we were bullied as a child and bullied through high school, that is going to be way more sensitive and way more top of mind in terms of our own self-security and own self-esteem, that it will actually be on the top of everything, where it's a little, okay, well, I came from school. Okay, but then what is the belief that is tied to that experience that is still allowing you to feel that the way you're doing? And then there's a huge excavation that happens from that point.
Yeah. So I've done some of this in some of my own practice, especially when you're looking for an ancestral issue.
Yeah.
And the question I would ask is, where did this start from? And with what ancestor? And I want to talk to that ancestor to find out what happened.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it, right? Is that everything is energy, and just because somebody isn't physically a conduit here in the now moment, The communication pathways are energy pathways. Again, like what we were saying about the grocery store, you can come into a grocery store and your energy, your astral body, right, the energy of who you are, is already having dialogue and communication pathways to the next energy next to you and to all the energies that are probably within a certain vicinity of you, right? You have somebody walk in a room. They don't even have to say a word. You just feel the energy shift happen into the room. It's either like a ooh or like a whoa, like who is
Mm-hmm.
that? Right? Because the energy pathways are already having dialogue and communication. And that is no different from when someone transitions. It's just a different way of communication. It's not physical, verbal communication. It's energetic communication that happens. And that's how we channel. That's how we have mediumship. That's how we have clairvoyancy, all of these elements, because it's just different pathways of communication. So when we're healing in this
Mm-hmm.
element, right, when we're looking to heal past lineages or anything of that nature, it's important that we understand that we also don't have to take identity and we don't have to take ownership of what has occurred, right? It's bringing the presence forward so that we can understand, so that we can come to a place of healing. That's all
Yes.
that it is.
Mm-hmm. Well, Roxanne, I so enjoyed talking to you about this. And
Hmm.
could you share your website and how people can contact you and find more information about you?
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody can find me at theilluminationretreat.com. And it was just such a pleasure meeting you, Tina. So thank you for having me today.
Yeah, and thank you for all the work that you're doing. This is really deep collective work too, and I always want to thank people like you that are doing it because the so think about the big picture and the collectives and the communities. It's a big job, but it's important, very important work that we need. And let's hope that we're moving into a place in a world where we have more conscious leadership.
Absolutely. And that's, my part of my sacred purpose. I don't know if I will see it in my lifetime. Again, that's none of my business. I just need to keep persevering with what feels in alignment with my soul and what I'm feeling called to do. It, just as you do, right, Tina? You feel called and you're honoring that call and you're honoring your journey and your pathway and your mission. And I want to commend you and I want to say thank you for being you. So thank you for creating and curating such a beautiful space to co-create these really kind of profound conversations, because even though they may not impact anyone and they may impact one, and that is, again, that's irrelevant, right? But it's the fact that these conversations are being had, and it's conversations like this that brings more self-awareness to our own conscious leadership.
Yes, for sure. And, may not reach a lot of people now, but someday it might, and it's going to be out there.
Yeah.
Um, Even if it's just for our descendants to say, hey, I remember this is my grandmother and this is what she was talking about in 2025.
Yeah. Oh, let me tap into her.
Right.
And that's the beauty too of creating like gifted children, right? Like everybody has a beautiful gift and magic, and to be able to nurture that self-leadership within them, to nurture their gifts and their abilities and their magic, like it's such an empowering place because they are our future. Our children
Hmm.
are the future.
And they want to know us. So why
I want
not
to know
let us
us.
leave some information about us? A little
Absolutely.
bit of what we were into, what we cared about in this certain timeline. And what
Yeah,
a gift that is.
absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Roxanne, for sharing
Thank
your story and your wisdom with us.
thank you, Tina, for having me. I appreciate you.